welcome to another edition of Carnivore Radio, Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And you talk about, items in the news. This one's, right front and center, and that's the Supreme Court nominee, Ms. Jackson. And stark contrast between Trump's two nominees, which is essentially a left-wing freak show versus the civility or overall civility of this hearing.
Yeah.
And before you get into, I have something. As I just said that, I'd love, and I'm sure our listeners would. Does it have any political wings or traction?
Well, I think there's definitely political wings on here. Aside from showing just how rabid the left has become, the Republicans are hammering her on being soft on crime. And that's going to be a topic that comes up again and again as we get closer to November, that Democrats are soft on crime. The other thing that's really interesting is that Biden has been beating the drum about this being the first African American woman to be nominated to the Supreme Court. And that is actually not true. In 2003, Judge Janice Rogers Brown was on a short list for George Bush to nominate to the Supreme Court. And she never made it through hearings because Joe Biden on the Judicial Committee filibustered her.
Okay, why don't we know about that? That is groundbreaking, and that's one issue. The second issue, assuming that she was on the more the conservative side, is it really you're not Jewish, you're not black, unless you are liberal. If you're conservative, black, Jewish, Hispanic, then you're a creep like all the rest of them.
Basically, that's it. Even more than that, though, they held her back specifically because they did not want the Republicans to get credit for putting an African-American woman on the bench. Now, remember, Republicans are the ones that put Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman, on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans are the ones that put Clarence Thomas, the first African-American, on the bench.
Who was brutalized, by the way.
Oh, yeah. The Democrats did not want them to be the party that put the first African-American woman on the bench. So the Democrats sidelined her for their own political purposes.
Two takeaways I have from that. I'm sure there's more. First takeaway is, isn't it just reminiscent of the whole situation with Biden that he's just a political hack? He has no original thought. He's a product, a growth, an outgrowth of the swamp, of the Beltway. That's all he was. He always was, and he always is a political hack.
He is. And, I mean, his opposition to having an African-American woman on the bench was very public. He actually went on Face the Nation and stated that he would filibuster if this woman was nominated.
Okay. Free press in America. I mean, maybe that's like with Santa Claus and Tinkerbell and the Tooth Fairy, but why don't we know about this?
Yeah, why haven't they
That's
talked
really
about
gross
it?
negligence.
It really is. And, there's been a lot of talk about state-sponsored media in Russia and Ukraine. How is our media any different?
There's no difference. I mean, even jumping a story is you look at the Hunter Biden laptop from hell. New York Times just recently, or like now, has a Maya Copa on it. Oh, by the way, just a little interesting fact: 1 out of 6 individuals that were polled who voted for Biden potentially said they would have reconsidered knowing what this all entails. So, gee, you think there's a withholding of information? You think that might go against maybe a real free press? And aren't they just a wing of the Democratic Party? Hey, you release it now, who cares? Like, someone's dead, so you can tell that they were embezzling money. Who cares? At this point, it's a story, but it's half the story it could have been.
It clearly would have changed the election. And even now, where's the rest of the media? The New York Times basically buried this story. I mean, their story about what Hunter Biden is doing, appeared on page 20 of Section A, and you had to go 26 paragraphs down before they got to the fact that the laptop
Okay, the
was
only person
real.
that ever read that is someone who's retired or in prison,
Yeah,
or
it's,
both. Or yeah, way too much time on their hands. But yeah, it is troubling. You see what's going on, but you know what intrigues me, Dr. Lopkin, is in spite of the press clamping on stories and basically carrying the water until lately for Biden, um, he's really tanking. A recent poll that just came out, he's underwater 36%, but more importantly, he's got a horrible, horrific approval rating from independents of only 24%. That's hasta nuega in terms of an election.
it really is. And it's because Biden misread the polls and misread the election results. The left convinced him that they were the ones that got him elected. The fact of the matter is, they're not. It was
Trump got him
independent.
elected.
Well, it was independents that got
Hmm.
him elected because they wanted somebody who they thought was going to be a little saner than Trump. Turns out that's not what was happening. But they wanted a centrist. That was how he campaigned. And when he turned towards the left, as soon as he was elected, independents went, wait a minute, that's not what we voted for. That's not what we agreed to. And he's been kowtowing to the left because they convinced him that they're the ones that got him elected, but it's independents that got him elected, and it's independents that are going to take Congress away from the Democrats in November and keep him from getting a second term,
Yes,
assuming
I
he
don't
even
think a
runs.
second term is ever going to be in the cards. I think he's way too depleted for that. But speaking of depletion, I think that's one of the reasons why he can't adjust on the fly. We talked about Clinton, a darling of the left, when he was elected in '92, and then he had the ability because he was a smart guy, he was politically savvy. Could he adjusted on the fly? And besides the impeachment and Monica Lewinsky fiasco, he was a successful president. But this guy, Biden, I mean, does he really even know what day? He has no ability to formulate original idea. He's a bookmark.
That's pretty much it. And I mean, it's hysterical because Jen Psaki keeps using the term that history will decide. We'll leave that to the history books. The history books are going to say Biden was a horrible president who may very well have presided over World War III.
Yeah, no, it's a very scary situation. You like him or not, Nixon. A lot of people don't like him, but he had the world respect, I believe. I'm sorry to say, Trump, comparatively so, had the attention and the respect of world leaders. This guy's not. I mean, he's a buffoon. It's pathetic. It's like a
I mean,
bad B movie.
you literally have foreign leaders not taking his calls.
Yeah, and that's reminiscent of Obama when the Chinese didn't basically greet him at the airport. That's sending a clear signal. Yes, not respected. But speaking of not respected, and I think it's just a tip of the iceberg of incompetency throughout this. It's rampant through this administration. Mayorkas, the, the head of in charge of immigration, and a total buffoon challenging court rulings. I mean, this guy's talking about being beholden to the left. He's more interested in letting people in. He's clearly stated that's his mission, not preventing, but encouraging. And
Yeah,
again,
he's
Biden doesn't understand that that's one of the Achilles heel of this administration's people's outrage and what's going on at the border. But can he make adjustments? No.
and no, he refuses to make adjustments. And part of that, though, is I honestly believe he's looking at demographic research from 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where, African Americans voted reliably Democrat, Hispanics voted reliably Democrat. That's not the case anymore. Especially, I mean, African Americans are switching in fairly large numbers, but Hispanics are switching parties in droves primarily because of what's going on at the border, because these guys went through their paces, went through immigration law, to become citizens. And now they're going, well, wait a minute, these guys are just jumping the line.
They're jumping the line, but they're also being, I'll use the term resettled, which is another word for they want them voting next election.
All right. And that's why New York said, well, you know what? Illegal aliens can vote in New York City elections. That's absolutely ridiculous. And they're going to find it's against the state constitution of New York. So once that's going to go to court, and even the state judges are going to have to go, well, no, we have rules against this.
But isn't it really a bellwether that the Democratic Party is in panic zone? They've lost Middle America. They've lost U.S. Hispanics, U.S. African Americans. I'm talking citizens. So they're scrambling. It's like, I'm not saying it's well thought out, but it's like any situation. When you're in a panic, either in business or in your personal, you probably don't make the best. So what else do they got? They're losing everyone in droves. I mean, only
Yeah,
15% of this country is into the crap they're preaching, and half of those people are in insane asylums.
I think a big part of the problem is that the Democratic Party stopped listening to Americans and started listening to Twitter. And the fact of the matter is, what is on Twitter is a liberal echo chamber, uh, especially helped on by the fact that if you put conservative information on there, Twitter bans you.
Though, I agree with that without any question. It's hard to argue with that, obviously, but I think it goes deeper and longer than that. I think that parties have switched. It's like having a railroad track when I was a kid. The train, you have a switching track, and I think they've done that. I would say maybe 8 years ago, something like that, during probably the Obama that time period. I think it was the Republicans that were the country clubs, big business. It's completely different now, and I think that's part of the reasons because the Pelosi's and Schumer, they're up in in the vineyard, in the Hamptons, eating sushi, having some Chardonnay. They don't even know how to spell America.
Actually, I'm going to go even further back than that. I don't think the Democrats were ever the party of the American people. Yes, they got into bed with the unions because they needed their support. But there was a conversation just earlier today. Jamie Dimon, the head of Goldman Sachs, and he's been head of Goldman Sachs for a while, has been a diehard Democrat for decades. They've always had Wall Street backing. I think it was just a matter of messaging. And now they've lost the message because after all of this time, all of the policies Obama put out that actually harmed rural America, that harmed minorities, that harmed the working class, they're starting to see, all right, you know what? These guys are not in our corner and they're backing away from the Democrats. So the Democrats are doubling down on left wing propaganda because they don't have anything left.
I would concur with that as well. I think it also can go, believe it or not, we don't need a history lesson, but go back to Nixon's silent majority, the roots of Vietnam, working class people, the people that fought in Vietnam being abandoned by the Democratic parties, the ones that got us into the war. I think that was, I would say, the beginning of this separation, but that's for another edition. Speaking of this, our esteemed president and his group there, we have Camilla and Joe having a little marital disagreement, and there's a book coming out that they're really not getting along that well together. In fact, Camilla's resenting him putting her